Coming up across lands, seas and skies, more species are being lost to deforestation and disease. Does anyone care?
Vertebrate populations since 1970 have declined 73% on average.
That's a huge number.
A mother talks about the possibility of a considerably warmer future.
My primary concern really is them turning around and asking me why I didn't do more.
And a bittersweet moment in US politics.
The next item here is the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Treaty.
Planet's top environmentalists react to Donald Trump's executive orders.
One, he doesn't care about climate change. Second, he doesn't understand science. He doesn't believe in science.
It's absurd, isn't it?
Just 2 degrees is on. Now.
I mean, I don't know if the world can survive for 4 years of Trump presidency.
Like hurricane clouds quickly rolling in from the Gulf of America, I guess. Donald Trump and his team are creating chaos for environmental science and activism with those executive actions he signed after swearing in as president. Many people had expected him for months to reverse Joe Biden's climate policies, but there was hope that the California fires and 2024 being declared the hottest year on record would sway his decisions. No such luck.
And the next item, sir, is a letter that will be transmitted to the United Nations explaining that we are withdrawing from the Paris Climate Treaty.
And you're witnessing the dawn of the golden age of America. That's what it's going to be.
My plan will terminate the Green New Deal, which I call the Green New Scam. Greatest scam in history, probably. A $10 trillion scam. Will not stand. I will reverse it immediately. It'll be done immediately. And we will drill, baby, drill. We're going to be drilling in a lot of other locations, and the energy costs are going to come way down. They'll be brought down to a very low level. Our country, they're littered all over our country like dropping paper, like dropping garbage in a field, and that's what happens to them because in a period of time. Thereby saving the U.S. auto industry from complete obliteration, which is happening right now.
气候变化是全人类面临的共同挑战，没有一个国家能够置身事外。也没有一个国家能够独善其身。中国积极应对气候变化的决心。
Ich verstehe das amerikanische Volk ehrlich gesagt nicht, wie man sowas wählt.
As expected, climate organizations have been reacting to Trump's executive orders, and countries that regularly experience drought, floods, rising seas are not happy. A few of them reached out to us to tell us how they...
What you heard President Trump say as it pertained to the US's climate policy on Inauguration Day, are you alarmed? Are you concerned? How do you feel about it?
I can't say I'm surprised. At this point, very little surprises me anymore.
President Trump's, inner circle, which is, surrounded by oil and gas industry folks.
I think we're asking the wrong questions and having the wrong discussions.
We are on the very edge of climate breakdown, and seeing one of the biggest polluters completely denying climate crisis and translating that into policy is definitely very, very worrying.
I mean, when you've spent a year being gaslit by Western leaders and media, while simultaneously witnessing in real time on our screens the atrocities and the suffering of the Palestinian people, it fundamentally shifts your understanding of power and complicity.
And now Trump is going to provide a free pass to the entire fossil fuel industry, and in the name of energy emergency.
Trump is not the enemy, nor is he the solution. He is a symptom of something much larger, much deeper.
Do you think he cares at all about climate change?
One, he doesn't care about climate change. Second, he doesn't understand science. He doesn't believe in science.
If he actually did believe in climate change, and he cared about his kids the way he says he does, he would actually realize that climate change would do a whole lot of damage to Trump holdings across the world, all those golf courses.
They believe that they can extract every last dime out of U.S. resources before they're going to be forced to, face the transition to a low carbon economy.
As he wants to stop funding and allocating and stop funding and stop giving out loans for wind turbines. He wants to stop the Inflation Reduction Act from directing funds into special climate projects. Is this really all just about money for Trump? Saving money?
He basically claimed that by, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords, that he was going to be saving the United States $1 trillion. That number just doesn't exist.
The Trump administration has limited power. The people all say the U.S. president is the most powerful person in the world, but I don't know if that's entirely true, because states have a lot of power. Congress has a lot of power.
I just think it's a shame. There's so much money going into investment right now across the globe to low carbon development for steel production, aluminum production, and so many other hard to abate industries.
They're not going to get their way. It's very clear the trend where the world is going.
But by withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement Accords and then, moving forward with this drill baby drill policy, you're seeing how Trump is essentially setting the United States back, another 5 to 10 years, while the rest of the world, especially, our adversaries like China, are moving forward with their own decarbonization plans.
All of these steps that Trump is taking, they'll cause huge harm. They'll, in terms of the climate damage, in terms of the climate goals, but ultimately they're simply wasting their time, their money.
So the reality of the situation is our generation, so I'm a millennial, I am 30 years old, and the generations that follow currently do not have any political or institutional power to change anything, right? And we are rapidly depleting our 1.5 carbon budget. I mean, we only have 2 to 4 years remaining under current emission scenarios. And by the time we are old enough to lead, we will inherit an Earth system that has lost its stability, its resilience, and its life support functions that have defined the last 12,000 years of the Holocene, right?
What impact do you think the next 4 years, the amount of emissions that may happen within the next 4 years, what kind of impact do you think that will have on the planet?
I mean, I don't know if the world can survive for 4 years of Trump presidency.
Even last year, the U.S. only, decreased its, emissions by 0.2%. So it definitely doesn't seem like the time for the U.S. to be abdicating its position as a leader on combating climate change.
I mean, the intergenerational injustice is so hard to articulate, reconcile. I mean, the decisions that are being made this very decade are going to shape not just our futures and generations afterwards, but they are ultimately going to shape the entire behavior of the Earth system for the next thousands of years.
I think his actions are going to be so devastating, not only for the US citizens who are going to face direct impact in terms of ecosystem degradation or even displacement, but also for the entire global climate action, because the disasters that we saw in the US and around the world are just becoming normal and so frequent. And with this increasing fossil fuel extraction, we are only going to add fuel to the fire.
And so his rise, and many like him, only reflects real grievances about inequality, cultural change, and this institutional failure that has remained unaddressed. So when you see these the three wealthiest men in America sat behind Trump at his inauguration, I mean, this questions the very fabric of democracy. It is not a government by the people for the people, but an oligarchy bred and nurtured by decades of unchallenged neoliberalism and capitalism that then promotes this extreme self-interest and egocentricity. It has created a system of inequality that only serves the elite and not the many.
How should the international community respond even?
I think the thing is that, other countries, especially the EU, and now countries like China and India are really beginning to see that the market is moving to low carbon production. And the longer that it takes the US to move towards that low carbon production, the more international footprint it's going to lose in these markets.
But what it takes is 3 Republicans to vote against his plans to gut the IRA, and it doesn't happen. In fact, 18 Republicans signed a letter saying, let's not get rid of the IRA, let's be a bit more selective, because a lot of those green energy products actually benefit their own districts.
So over time, you start to recognize patterns. You can almost predict the cycles of behavior that sustain the Western imperial project.
Right now, you're looking at these international groups that under the Biden administration saw, an opportunity to get in at the ground floor. And then as they see Trump coming in, they understand that there's no benefit for them to be here right now.
And imagine we are talking about a country which is already the top fossil fuel producer and the biggest historical emitter. And the challenge is that it's going to have a ripple effect. So with the kind of policies he's going to take, and of course, with now him going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, it's going to affect the global climate action. There are going to be many countries who are going to hide behind the US inaction. And we are only going to see temperature rising, which means really going beyond that tipping point where we will see more devastation and irreversible climate impacts. So people in developing countries in particular who have no hand in causing the crisis are already facing the worst impacts, and it's going to be a lot more worse for them going forward.
I mean, what you're saying is catastrophic. Of course it is. I mean, I grieve for the planet, for my generation, for those who will come after us, of course, and all the communities already on the front lines of climate change. I mean, the same holds true when you witness the indescribable violence and suffering inflicted on animals in the Anthropocene, for example. So this systemic violence is deeply embedded in our society, and the denial of climate change, along with the deliberate delay of action, is just another manifestation of it.
Parents are especially concerned that their kids won't have a livable planet. An organisation called Parents for Future in the UK reached out to us to express their fear that their children may inherit a planet that's seemingly in decline.
It's not often we get an opportunity to highlight the perspective of a parent who is deeply concerned about what their son or daughter will be facing in the years ahead. How would you describe the way you feel about the world that your kids are growing up into?
I think that we're now at a point where, after many years of unnecessary debate about whether or not the climate crisis was here, it's firmly here. We've just discovered that last year, 2024, was the hottest on record, as was the year before. And despite the UK being one of the most responsible countries for extraction and consumption of fossil fuels, we've been one of the last to start to really see the responses and experience the impacts of climate breakdown. So it's very much here now. And as a parent, I read statistics like 90% of children globally breathing dirty air. And I see my children looking at the news and starting to ask me questions about flooding. And for me, I guess my primary concern really is them turning around and asking me why I didn't do more.
How old are your kids, by the way?
My kids are 7 and 9.
7 and 9. By the time they reach 25, 30 years old, we may be experiencing some significantly different types of weather. What do you anticipate the world will be like when they reach that age? Particularly in the UK, what do you think they'll be dealing with?
We're already starting to see flooding. We had a lot of flooding last year around Yorkshire and the East and West Midlands. So I would imagine that the flooding is going to increase. We're going to see very short, hot summers. And I think one of the primary concerns is in the UK that's going to be incredibly difficult to grow food. So I would say, yes, 30 years from now, I would be incredibly worried about food security.
It must be incredibly frustrating, this uncertainty that they may be inheriting a world that won't be friendly to them. The UNICEF, I remember a quote from UNICEF that says that climate change is a child's rights issue, a child's human rights issue. Do you agree with that phrase?
Yeah, absolutely. I concur with that phrase. And I think the research that we've done recently, which demonstrates that the majority of UK parents sort of would want to leave a healthy future above anything else, supports that as well. I mean, anything that we care about is impacted by rising climates, rising sea levels. So anything that our children want to do, or indeed that we want to do, anything that matters to us, from our health to our leisure, to our employment, to our connection to friends and families, what we eat, all of this, if we don't choose to kind of change ourselves, is going to be detrimentally affected.
What was it like for you as a child, and how different is it now?
I grew up with quite a lot of freedom, and I did, when I was younger, travel. I did grow up with a feeling that, with a certain amount of privilege living in the UK, feeling that there were lots of different things that I could do, and I don't think those options will be open to our children. Certainly in the UK, we've had a huge decline in our insect and bird population. And yeah, I remember growing up, our summers were full of, butterflies and, wasps trying to eat our picnics. And I was really connected to nature. And I actually found the other day, when I was going through some old things, when I was about 10 or 11, I'd kind of written this whole project on the climate and how much I loved nature, and talking about things like acid rain and greenhouse gases. And I kind of put that all down as a young person, because, to be honest, I assumed that, given that we knew the trouble that we were in, and given that we had the solutions, it was just going to be taken care of. So for many years, I just, I wrongly assumed that we weren't still going down that path. And it does make me question how it must feel for our young people today, who all they've known, they've grown up only knowing that we are in this crisis and that we have the solutions, and that our leaders are not acting on them quickly enough.
Yeah. From what I understand, you are actively trying to do something about it. What does your organization, Parents for Future, do exactly?
Well, we are the largest parent climate group in the UK. We were formed in 2019 by a small group of mums who were very much driven by love for their children, love for all children. And our mission really is to kind of galvanise parents to come together to act on climate. And we do that by inviting people into a community where together we can learn and advocate for sort of proven climate solutions.
We highlight on this show quite often how even the smallest animals are actually quite integral to maintaining healthy ecosystems. We take for granted creatures like earthworms, snails, bees, that each play a role, whether by naturally fertilizing the soil or pollinating our crops. Our friends at the World Wildlife Fund released a new report in January that details the tangible benefits we derive from nature. But the bad news, much of these creatures are in danger of being lost forever. So this WWF study that I read a bit about says that while the concept of nature's contributions to people is well established in science, business, it often assumes that protecting a habitat or ecosystem will automatically preserve the benefits people rely on. But I would assume that protecting a habitat would protect a species, or am I wrong?
Species face a lot of other threats as well. If we protect their habitat, but we don't also protect them from overhunting or overfishing, or we don't protect them from pollution or climate change or invasive species that can displace them, all of those are serious threats and they all need to be tackled together.
There is a beautiful park I walk through to get to the office every morning. And quite often when it rains, as you'd know, certain animals would come out, mollusks, snails, slugs. And quite often I would see a few of these, at least 3 or 4 of them, every time it rains, they're squashed on the floor. Obviously someone had mashed them. You see, that's my reaction when I see these things. But I ask that because I feel as though there's a disconnect between certain animals, no matter how gross some people think they are, and how important these animals are to us, like earthworms.
That in cities, the types that we tend to encounter are often considered to be pests. And so our interactions tend to be more negative often. So many things that seem scary actually do not pose a threat, but they are associated with other things that people have had a negative encounter with at some point. That's actually what we're trying to do, is reframe some of these ideas with this paper, try to bring together the actual evidence to show just what a lot of species are responsible for.
What would you say are the most prevalent signs of species under threat? I mean, just choose any one, I guess. There's so many.
Overall, we've found at WWF, we've released numbers that vertebrate populations since 1970 have declined 73% on average.
That's a huge number.
It's a huge number, and it's compounded by, these are felt across many, many species. Other studies have shown that 48% of all vertebrate species globally are in decline. So what happens when we start to lose those species, even in abundance, even when we don't lose the whole species, when the species doesn't go extinct but is just fewer in numbers, is that they can't play the critical roles that they play. Herbivores that keep the landscape looking the way that it looks and providing the functions that it can provide. Seed dispersers that can shape the whole composition of a forest or another ecosystem, and pollinators, crucially, that we rely on for the vast majority of our crops, as well as those species that sort of engineer the structure of an ecosystem, like beavers, that can change a riverscape to a lake, that can store water and purify that water. And when we start to see these declines, we can't count on those functions to continue to exist the way they have.
Is there even a way to tackle this? Or are we just looking at all of these plants, animals, and these beautiful creatures dying, and that's all we can say about it?
There's absolutely a way, and we've already made a lot of the commitments to get a long way toward that. The Convention on Biological Diversity made some huge commitments a couple years ago that we're still trying to figure out how to finance. But if we can reach those, one of the big ones was conserving 30% of nature's lands and waters in their natural state by 2030. And that would go a long way toward protecting the habitats, the range of a lot of these species.
Is anybody honoring this commitment?
Yeah, no, there's definitely, I have seen progress even within the US of, a nationwide strategy for America the Beautiful to reach this. California, where I live, has its own strategy. And so I think that there is this trickle down from national to even local governments to think about how are they going to reach these. But as we said, it's not just about the habitat. And so that same agreement also has provisions for preventing over exploitation and, halting and reversing these declines.
I have a controversial question for you. There's a growing movement that says that if we don't consume or use animals and animal products at all, this would tremendously help us maintain and sustain biodiversity and prevent any further loss. What is the WWF's take on, I guess, essentially veganism as a lifestyle?
I mean, I think WWF works in over 100 countries around the world, and a big part of the strategy is to always be led by the local people there. There are places where that strategy could work. And there are places where, maybe people are over consuming meat and could stand to dial it back a notch. There are other places where this is an essential part of a relationship that humans have had with the land for millennia, and disrupting that actually could do more harm, because they have become embedded in a part of the ecosystem. So I think imposing any one way of life on everyone globally is never a sustainable strategy, either socially or environmentally.
That's for sure. Here are a few images of the natural world, and a reminder that quite a few of these species still need protection.